Whiskey Cast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie. This is episode number 899 for September 20th, 2021. Coming up in a few minutes.
20 years ago when I told people as I traveled around that I was from Kentucky, typically the response was, oh. And now it's, you're from Kentucky? How cool. I was just at the Bourbon Trail and my cousin went. I want to do the Bourbon Trail. So, it's changed so much in perception. And it's something that we in Kentucky can really take some pride in.
September is Bourbon Heritage Month, but it's fair to say that while we're celebrating the history of bourbon this month, future generations may remember this period as one of the best ever for bourbon, not just in Kentucky, but around the U.S. The boom in bourbon is bringing lots of investment. For instance, it's been 12 years since Pernod Ricard got out of the American whiskey business when it sold Wild Turkey to Campari. But over the last several years, the Paris-based company and its U.S. unit have been actively buying up craft distillers and brands. Smooth Ambler in West Virginia, Rabbit Hole and Jefferson's in Kentucky, and Firestone and Robertson in Texas. I'll talk with Jefferson's bourbon founder, Trey Zoeller, and Pernod Ricard USA's Craig Johnson later on Whiskey Cast in Depth, along with Steve Beam of Limestone Branch Distillery in Kentucky. Steve and his brother Paul are now on their second corporate partnership after Luxco was acquired earlier this year by MGP. That's just ahead, along with the What I'm Tasting This Week department, Your Voice, Behind the Label, and...
I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but we used to be able to order labels and get them here in 2 weeks. Now we're sometimes 2 months.
The news is next on this week's Whiskey Cast.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Robin Redbreast? You may have seen me around. Face label, label face. Yeah, that's the one. I'm now contractually obligated to be their spokesbird. Yeah, my agent didn't read the small print.
Proud sponsor of Whiskey Cast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
What do Japan and Scotland have in common? You guessed it, whiskey. That's why Dewar's brought these two cultures together in our newest cask series innovation, introducing Dewar's 8-year Japanese Smooth. We took the Dewar's you know and love and finished it in rare Mizunara oak casks for a complex and balanced Scotch whiskey like no other.
Let's get started with the news. And as I'm recording this, the White House has just announced that it will open the U.S. borders to vaccinated air travelers from Europe, the UK, India, China, and other countries in early November. The exact date has not been announced yet. Visitors will have to show proof of vaccination at least 2 weeks before traveling, along with a negative COVID test taken within 3 days of travel. Fully vaccinated U.S. citizens will still have to show the same negative COVID test within 72 hours, but unvaccinated U.S. citizens will have to be tested within 24 hours of travel and once again after arriving in the U.S. The change does not affect travel by land at the borders with Canada and Mexico. The U.S. is extending the current ban on non-essential travel by land by citizens of both countries until October 21st, though they are allowed to travel to the U.S. by air. This will all have an impact on whiskey tourism, both in the U.S., Canada, Europe, and elsewhere. The strike by union workers at Heaven Hill's main production sites in Bardstown, Kentucky, is now in its second week. There's been no word from either Heaven Hill or the United Food and Commercial Workers on progress in resolving the strike, which began last Saturday when workers set up picket lines in Bardstown. The strike affects the main bottling plant for Heaven Hill, along with maturation warehouses in the area. Workers are rejecting the company's desire to go to 7-day production, with some workers assigned to weekend shifts. We'll keep you updated during the week at whiskycast.com. if there is a resolution. Meanwhile, the global shipping and logistics issues stemming from the COVID pandemic are likely to keep giving whiskey makers nightmares for months to come. They're used to looking ahead when it comes to planning for future whiskey demand, but as Ashley Frey of Nevada's Frey Ranch Distillery told us on Friday's Happy Hour Live webcast, this is adding a whole new level of craziness to the process.
Right now, we're ordering things about a year ahead of time. So if we need glass next year, we're ordering it now. We're putting down a 50% deposit. We're getting on their schedule, which is scary from a small business perspective because you're upfronting a lot of cash ahead of time, cash that you could probably use to run your business. But we can't sell it if we don't have bottles. So, the lead time on the glass is about a year. Labels have gotten out of control. I know it doesn't sound like a lot, but we used to be able to order labels and get them here in 2 weeks. Now we're sometimes 2 months, which does put a whole, kink in all of our supply chain, whether we're sitting on a PO that our distributor needs or, we're trying to just get some product out the door. Our toppers come from Argentina and we have to have these made in Argentina. The medallion gets made in Argentina as well. They get sent down to Mexico City where the glass is produced. After the glass is produced, they apply the medallion. It's a lot. The boxes and the shippers come from a different company. Everybody has their own lead time.
Supply chain issues are affecting distillers, both large and small. As we reported earlier this month, Brown-Forman cited its own supply chain issues as one of the reasons it expects to start passing along higher costs to consumers by raising prices for its whiskeys soon. Speaking of Brown-Forman, it's out with the 4th annual release of the limited edition King of Kentucky bourbon. This year's release is a 14-year-old single-barrel bottling created from 33 barrels selected by master distiller Chris Morris. Around 2,700 bottles will be available in Kentucky, Illinois, and Ohio, with a recommended retail price of $249.99 a bottle. By the way, that price is unchanged from last year. I'll have my tasting notes for King of Kentucky in a few minutes. And speaking of kings, the king, it's been 44 years since Elvis Presley died, but long live the king, at least for whiskey fans. Grain and Barrel Spirits has launched a pair of Elvis-branded whiskeys in a long-term deal with the Presley estate. Elvis Whiskey is a Tennessee straight whiskey from an undisclosed distillery, while the Elvis Rye comes from MGP in Indiana. Both are bottled at 45% ABV and will be available this fall with a recommended retail price of $49.99 a bottle. Continuing with the music theme for just a minute, Hudson Whiskey is out with its oldest release yet. 4-Part Harmony is a 7-year-old 4-grain bourbon featuring equal parts of rye and wheat, along with corn and malted barley. It'll carry a recommended retail price of $69.99 a bottle. Enough with the music stuff now. Stoli Group's Kentucky Owl Bourbon is out with its first bourbon produced in collaboration with Bardstown Bourbon Company. The Wise Man is also the first release for new master blender John Ray, who joined Kentucky Owl back in June after spending most of his career at Four Roses. The Wise Man is a blend of 4-year-old wheat and high rye bourbons distilled for Kentucky Owl, along with 5- and 8-year-old sourced whiskeys. It'll sell for around $60 a bottle. And Diageo's out with its annual limited edition release of Blade and Bow 22-year-old bourbon. It's made using a Solera system that keeps some of the DNA from the final bourbons distilled at Zoeller in Louisville in the blend. It's available at the Zoeller shop in Louisville, along with 12 U.S. states. No word on pricing. Turning now to Ireland, Walsh Whiskey has unveiled its first-ever single pot still version of Writer's Tears. It started out in ex-bourbon barrels and was then matured in a combination of Pedro Jimenez sherry casks and Floria Marsala hogsheads. The initial release of 5,800 bottles hits next month in Ireland, along with the UK, France, Germany, and Holland. The recommended retail price is €59.99 a bottle. It'll be available next year in the U.S. In Scotland, Distill has unveiled its 2021 limited edition releases, including a 17-year-old Tobermory matured in Oloroso sherry casks, and a 22-year-old Lechig matured in Pedro Jimenez sherry casks. There's also a 10-year-old Bunnahabhain. Unouch is a blend of port and sherry cask matured single malt. And finally, Deanston is releasing a 2008 Oloroso cask matured single malt. Prices range from £80 a bottle for the Deanston to £250 for the Lechig. Compass Box has added a new permanent expression to its lineup. Orchard House comes from malt whiskeys John Glaser sourced almost a decade ago for their fruit-forward flavor. It'll carry a recommended retail price of $50 a bottle in the U.S. when it arrives next month. Canada's 40 Creek Distillery is releasing 2 new whiskeys, including its first-ever cask-strength whiskey. Master's Cut is a pot-distilled whiskey matured in a combination of ex-bourbon barrels and used Canadian whiskey barrels. It's selling for $79.95 Canadian a bottle. Master blender Bill Ashburn has also created Tap Room in collaboration with the nearby Bench Brewing in Ontario's Niagara region. They used Canadian oak barrels previously used for 40 Creek's Confederation Oak whiskey to age their beer, then sent the barrels back to finish Ashburn's blend for Tap Room. It's packaged in growler-style bottles and will be available starting this week exclusively in Ontario through the LCBO and the distillery's shop for $39.95 Canadian a bottle. In France, Alfred Giraud is out with the first in its exploratory series. Voyage is a blended malt with whiskeys originally aged in Sauternes and Robinho wood casks, then finished in cognac casks after blending. It'll be available in select U.S. markets for around $180 a bottle. And India's Amrut Distilleries is taking a bold step to show off single malts from other Indian distilleries. It's launching the Single Malts of India range with the new Nidal expression. The name comes from ancient Tamil texts and refers to coastal regions. Nidal was sourced from an undisclosed coastal distillery. 12,000 bottles will be available worldwide, with 1,200 of those bottles to go on sale in India. There is no word on pricing. We do have one quick update on the question over whether the UK will end its import tariffs on American whiskeys, stemming from the 3-year-long dispute over steel and aluminum tariffs. While the British government is still going through its process for rebalancing its tariffs to more directly target the metals industry, the final decision will be up to a new minister. Prime Minister Boris Johnson shook up his cabinet this past week, and one of the moves was to name Anne-Marie Trevelyan the new Secretary of State for International Trade. She replaces Liz Truss, who had been working on the issue with Biden administration officials and will now serve as Johnson's Foreign Secretary. Trevelyan is scheduled to meet virtually Monday with U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai. And finally, the Kentucky Bourbon Festival wrapped up this weekend in Bardstown with new champions in the traditional World Championship Bourbon Barrel Relay, sponsored by Independent Stave Company. Heaven Hill has dominated the competition in recent years, but the strike knocked its teams out of the competition this year. Bardstown Bourbon Company won the men's team event, beating Jim Beam and Maker's Mark. Corey Miles of Maker's Mark won the men's individual competition. Maker's Mark won the women's team event over Jim Beam, while Megan Dobry of Jim Beam won the women's individual event. Congratulations to all. You can keep up on the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com. Don't forget to join us each Friday at 5 p.m. New York time for our Happy Hour live webcast on the WhiskeyCast YouTube channel, our Facebook page, Twitter, and Twitch. If you missed Friday night's webcast with Colby and Ashley Frey of Frey Ranch Farmers and Distillers, Gareth Howells of Aberfeldy, and actor Beth Bears, the on-demand replay is available right now at our YouTube channel. The podcast version will be out later this week. Time now for the WhiskeyCast calendar of events. We'll start off with some good news and some bad news. First, the good news. Tickets are now on sale for the rescheduled Spirit of Speyside Festival. It'll be November 3rd through the 8th in Scotland. And the bad news, organizers of the New Brunswick Spirits Festival in Fredericton, New Brunswick, have decided to cancel what would have been their 25th anniversary festival for the second straight year because of the pandemic. They were not able to secure the whiskeys they wanted or the whiskey personalities they wanted because of logistics and travel restrictions, and they decided it would be better to wait until November of 2022 and do it right. Other events coming up soon. Whiskey and Barrel Night is set for this Wednesday in Chicago. The Speed Art Museum in Louisville has its annual Art of Bourbon auction online this Thursday night. Whiskey Live Paris kicks off on Saturday and runs through Monday. The Whiskey X is October 1st in Denver, and the Whiskey Show in London runs from the 1st through the 3rd. The Tonsberg Whiskey Festival is on October 2nd in Tonsberg, Norway, and round one of the Stockholm Beer and Whiskey Festival is October 5th through the 9th in Sweden. Finally, the Whiskey Shop in Dufton, Scotland, has its annual Whiskey Colours Festival, October 8th through the 10th. Keep in mind that all in-person events are still subject to change on short notice, depending on local health requirements, and you may be required to show proof of vaccination and/or a recent negative COVID test to attend. If you're organizing a whiskey event in the near future, please let us know about it. Just use the contact form at the WhiskeyCast website to get in touch with us. We'll be glad to add it to our searchable calendar at whiskycast.com.
It's been 175 years and Dewar's continues to stay curious. We're proud to announce the newest addition to the innovative Dewar's 8-year cask-finish series of Scotch whiskey, Dewar's Japanese Smooth. Brought to life by our award-winning master blender, Stephanie McLeod, Japanese Smooth is a perfectly balanced 8-year-old Scotch whiskey that puts a pioneering and innovative focus on our aging process. After 8 years in Scotland, we blend, age again, then finish this whiskey in casks made from 200-year-old Mizunara oak trees. Rare, sure, but worth it. The Mizunara oak perfectly complements the tasty notes with Dewar's Scotch whiskey. Japanese Smooth is loaded with Dewar's signature honey and floral notes, with the Japanese Mizunara oak adding exotic sweet and spicy flavors. Curious? Try this one in a perfect Japanese highball or on the rocks.
WhiskeyCast In Depth is brought to you by Oban and the Classic Malts lineup. You might have heard something recently about a bourbon boom. Okay, it's more than just a boom, since bourbon sales have been growing by leaps and bounds for the last decade or so, even with the import tariffs in Europe and the UK cutting into export sales over the last 3 years. That has prompted new investment in bourbon, along with the revival of longtime family distilling traditions and brands. 10 years ago, Steve and Paul Beam opened Limestone Branch Distillery in Lebanon, Kentucky, following in the footsteps of their ancestors in the Beam and Dant family trees. One of the many whiskeys their family created and distilled over the years was Yellowstone, but the current rights to that brand were owned by Luxco. The Beams offered to buy the rights to the brand, but Luxco came back with an offer to buy into Limestone Branch instead, and they've been partners ever since. Earlier this year, a third partner entered the mix when MGP acquired Luxco. I caught up with Steve Beam the other night at the American Whiskey Convention in Philadelphia on one of his first ventures away from the distillery since the pandemic started.
It's been a crazy year and a half. I mean, I feel like I've lost like a whole year. So I tell somebody it was last year, I go, wait a minute, that was 2 years ago. It's interesting. The woman helping me at the booth today was helping me at the booth at the Philadelphia Flower Show when this all first started. It was like the last event that we did. So it's kind of like the last and the first. So it's kind of interesting that it's in Philadelphia both times.
Tell us about the new Yellowstone 2021 edition.
So the 2021 is a 7-year bourbon finished in Amarone casks. So it's we put about 5 years or 5 months into the Amarone cask, and it's a beautiful whiskey, 101 proof. Starts out a little light, but then develops with the second and third sip. It actually it starts to coat your tongue and starts to have that nice finish from the Amarone.
You and your partners at Luxco now have some new corporate friends in the family with
we do.
The guys over in Bardstown at Lux Row following the deal with MGP and everybody, right?
Correct.
How's that working out so far?
Yeah, it's been great so far. We are operating with kind of like with Luxco the same as we've always have. Things haven't really changed too much at the distillery. Some of the supply, like grain and barrels, have changed a little bit, for the economies of scale. But other than that, the distilling procedures and everything really hasn't changed. Of course, we just went through a major expansion for us. We're still quite small, but we went from 1 to 2 barrels a day to our capacity now is about 10 barrels a day, and we're doing about 7. So tiny, but still huge for us.
Well, yeah, when you're going from 2 to 7, that's a big change.
Yes.
How hard was it to make the decisions to cope with all that and to set everything up?
It went fairly easy, actually, and we're still in the same footprint we always have. We just, had bigger, deeper fermenters and added another still. We did remove the bottling line from the distillery area, so it's now up in our warehouse, shipping and receiving warehouse. So, but it was great, and that is one of the things that having good partners makes it a lot easier to do things like that.
What's the future for you guys? Continue to build up gradually and slowly here, because I know some of the whiskey that you're bottling, the Yellowstone, it's not all the stuff you're distilling yet, right?
Right. And the Yellowstone Select is a blend, and probably will continue to be a blend for quite some time because it's distributed in all 50 states and about a half a dozen or a dozen countries. It varies, but so there's no way that making a couple barrels a day that we could do that. But we do have ours coming out soon, so it'll be coming out the first of the year. So I'm excited about that, and it's also Yellowstone's 150th anniversary. So it's very exciting, and that we're going to introduce that.
That should be interesting. I can't wait to try that one. What can you tell us about the whiskey itself, or can you say anything yet?
Can't say much, but I give it. No, it definitely has our fingerprint. So when you taste it, you will know that it's from Limestone Branch. So, but it's exciting, and I'm really happy to finally have it out. When we first started, we were making very few barrels, so it took a while to build up, and then we use a pot still. And I think the pot still benefits from the extra 2 years, so of the 6 year, to help calm some of those things down a little bit. And so that's why we waited and didn't release it at 4. I tasted it at 4. I was like, no, this needs a little bit more time. So we let it sit and didn't rush. Again, having a good partner allowed us the luxury of waiting on that. And so we're excited to have that out this first quarter.
I'll have my tasting notes for the 2021 Yellowstone in just a few minutes. The Bourbon Boom has, as I said before, resulted in millions of dollars in new investment into the American whiskey business, and Pernod Ricard has been one of the most active players. It sold Wild Turkey in 2009 to finance its acquisition of Absolute Vodka, but over the last several years, Pernod Ricard USA's New Brand Ventures unit has been a buyer. It's acquired Smooth Ambler in West Virginia, Firestone and Robertson in Texas, and Rabbit Hole in Kentucky, all while leaving the founders in place to run the distilleries. Company executives in Paris pulled the trigger on another deal, acquiring New York-based Castle Brands 18 months ago, giving it Jefferson's Bourbon, along with Napog Castle Irish Whiskey, Gosling's Rum, and other spirits brands. Jefferson's is now part of the New Brand Ventures unit. Founder Trey Zoeller remains in place, just like his colleagues at the other distilleries. And Trey joined me on a Zoom call the other day, along with Pernod Ricard USA's Craig Johnson. Despite the tariffs in Europe that sort of cut into export sales, bourbon just keeps on growing, doesn't it?
It does. It does. And knock on wood, it's going to keep growing. As you're well aware, we've had it in our history where all other spirits combined to sell what bourbon did. So why can't we get there now? Obviously we're putting down a lot more bourbon than we used to. It wasn't too long ago that we were talking about that there's more barrels in Kentucky than there are people. And now that's about 3 times more barrels than there are people in Kentucky. And it soon will be 4 times. So we're laying it down, but we grew quite a bit last year. And if we could have bottled up more, we would have grown even more. So it's amazing, just the transition of people they're really not just casual enthusiasts, but real enthusiasts, always blows me away. I was just out in Montana and I ran into a group of young folks that came out to Kentucky for a bachelor party recently. And I told them 20 years ago when I told people as I traveled around that I was from Kentucky, typically the response was, "Oh." And now it's, "You're from Kentucky? How cool. I was just at the Bourbon Trail," or "My cousin went. I want to do the Bourbon Trail." So, it's changed so much in perception. And it's something that we in Kentucky can really take some pride in. We always have, but now it's, people can understand why.
We haven't really had a chance to talk since Jefferson's joined the Pernod Ricard family when Pernod Ricard acquired Castle Brands, which was your home for many years. What has that meant to you in terms of having a really big, really stable company behind you? Because Castle Brands was a good company, but if you look at the financials, they sort of seemed to be skating on the edge at times, just trying to keep the doors open.
Well, that's pleasantly put. Stability and having a machine or an army like Pernod Ricard behind us is, it's been really inspiring for me, because not only can we achieve what we've done in the last 18 months, which has certainly increased our sales, but the infrastructure that we're putting down around it and the amount of whiskey that we're laying down today and what our plans are for the future is, it's something to really get excited about. I was kind of a one-arm paper hanger doing a lot of things before. And now we've got resources that, just teams of very intelligent, forward-thinking people that help me take it to where I think this brand can be, and also teach me a hell of a lot in areas that I'm just not versed in.
Greg, I want to bring you into this. What did it mean for Pernod Ricard USA to get back into the bourbon business? I remember having a conversation a few years ago with Alexander Ricard at one of the holiday parties in New York, where I suggested that if he perhaps had access to a time machine, the one thing he might have done was gone back and not sell Wild Turkey a few years ago. That move took you guys out of bourbon for a few years, and now you're back in. Explain the reason for jumping back in.
I think the reason is pretty clear. The category is booming. Brands are growing. This category is driving premiumization in the spirits industry in the United States. So we felt we had to get back into the category. And we wanted to do it in, a way that really Pernod Ricard and Pernod Ricard works with entrepreneurs all over the world to bring brands into our portfolio, to work and be inspired by these entrepreneurs and to, really try and learn from them and use, as Trey was just saying, our kind of the muscle of Pernod Ricard to help grow these brands. So I think it's a real pleasure to work on this bourbon portfolio or American whiskey portfolio that is, so dynamic. This idea of kind of new fashion bourbons, our bourbons from Texas and West Virginia and Kentucky. We have a great portfolio. So we're very excited. Obviously, we want to be where growth is happening, and we want to help these brands really, truly become growth engines for the company.
You acquired these brands over the last several years in a variety of transactions, from dealing with the entrepreneurs like John Little at Smooth Ambler and Cava Zamanian at Rabbit Hole, and the guys down at Firestone and Robertson in Texas, in terms of working with them individually. Jefferson's and Trey you acquired in the deal with Castle Brands as a bigger part of the portfolio. How important was Jefferson's as part of that decision to acquire Castle Brands, since it came with Knapog Castle and Gosling's Rum and some other folks?
Yeah, I think Jefferson's was the centerpiece of that. And the results that we're having now with Jefferson's really shows the power of the brand, the power of what Trey has built, and the decision that Pernod Ricard made.
What is the future that you see in the marketplace for American whiskey? Obviously, millions of dollars of investment. Are you confident that the market is going to continue to grow domestically and will take care of the international market once the tariffs are resolved?
Yeah, I think growth runways in this industry can last for a long time. And bourbon growth has been going on for many years now, but we do expect it to continue. We expect the premiumization of the category to continue. And, most importantly, we know that consumers are enjoying American whiskeys as part of their portfolio in many different occasions. And that's what makes, the category special, is it can be, as simple as having a whiskey at night to, help end your day, or it can be in a really high-end mixology bar, in cocktails. And, it can span from outdoor, indoor, all the occasions that people drink bourbon in shows that there is a lot of runway for growth to continue. And we do think our brands and our premium positions allow us to take advantage of Pernod Ricard's global strength and to help build these brands. It's going to be a long road, but you see premium bourbon growing around the world, and that provides us with a lot of optimism.
Is that where you see the big growth factor coming around the world, or in the domestic market as more people internationally discover bourbon and American whiskeys?
I think we'll have growth in both areas, but, we're focused right now really on growth in the domestic market, and then, rolling it out with a measured pace in other markets.
Trey, you're about to release a whole bunch of new bourbons this fall. Give us a sense of the innovation process that went into these, because obviously some of this predated the acquisition and are things that you've been working on for a while. What goes into creating some of these, and what did you learn in terms of working with the Pernod Ricard team in terms of marketing them?
Well, and you're right, a lot of this predated before we were acquired by Pernod Ricard. And luckily, I've been doing a lot of experimentation since around 2010 is really where we started really picking it up. We've done hundreds of experiments with independent stave, and the great thing about that is I can have patience. There's nothing that needs to be pushed out, and if a number of them fail, who cares? We've got a number of other ones out there. But if there's some things that really shine and there's a particular reason to get involved with it, then we want to push it forward. And, we'll usually start off with a couple barrels, play them out, depending on if it's an environment and an agitation experiment or a finishing or blending. It gives us some life to really pick and choose and come out with things that we really feel that we're making a big difference and have a real reason to be in the market with it. We've got some pretty big innovations coming up in the next couple of years, and to have Pernod Ricard's discipline is going to help, and to have the resources to really make these big launches, I think are going to be fundamental to the success of what these can be and how they can really be kind of some game changers for us. So one of the things that I was told early on when I was brought on, we don't want you to be Pernod Ricardized. We want you to be innovative as you can be. We want you to be entrepreneurial, and we don't want to stifle that. Now, if I could just get legal to do the same thing, then it'd be great. But there are some more checks and balances. But, you just get so many more resources behind you as well.
Somebody has to be the adult in the room and say no sometimes.
Right. Yeah.
I think
and it sure as hell isn't going to be me.
It truly is one of the special parts of our portfolio is working with dynamic entrepreneurs like Trey and Kaveh and John and the people down in Texas. It is super exciting to see, how their minds work. And I think you bring the best of both worlds of a company who has a lot of rigor in terms of consumers and route to market. And then you get the energy and pace of an entrepreneur. And when we can make that kind of work together, it creates a really great cocktail for our brands.
When are we going to see more collaboration between these four brands in the U.S. and say your colleagues over in Scotland and Ireland?
It's one of those things that we're able to, it's one of the advantages of working with Pernod Ricard. There's some very talented people over there who have some incredible brands, and this gives us access to a whole different world than I've had previously.
Greg?
Yeah, I would agree. I think the power of our portfolio around the world, whether it's our Irish whiskeys or it's our, great Scotch whiskey portfolio, you will start to see us working together more cohesively to help these brands because of the dynamism that we have in our portfolio of American whiskeys, but within all of our Scotch brands and all of our Irish whiskey brands on top of other categories. It is the working together and allowing experimentation is really important. And you will start to see some of those things coming out. You'll just have to wait. Sorry.
Of course. The old watch this space. I get that from your colleagues over in Europe all the time, too, so I'm used to it.
We've got a lot of exciting things coming forward, and we're really excited about that. COVID was a boom for most of the bourbon world. And we suffered some out of stocks along the way, but now we're expanding our portfolio back to having some of the expressions that we've had before. And then just, I think some of the things that we're coming out soon will be really exciting. And I'm very, very anxious and excited about our future for a number of different reasons and ready to get back out there.
Craig, I've got to ask you this one. Are you still looking for other acquisitions? Is Jeff Agdren out there still beating the bushes for other distilleries to take an interest in?
I think Pernod Ricard is always on the lookout for other partnerships. I think the success we've seen with these American whiskeys, with brands like Monkey 47 and the partnership we've developed with that team, just leads us to say our model of acquisition is working for us. I think it shows entrepreneurs what Pernod Ricard can bring to brands, and it shows what these brands can bring to the portfolio. So yes, we are on the lookout.
As for Castle Brands, observers had speculated at the time of the acquisition that Pernod Ricard would absorb it and its brands into the larger company. While Jefferson's was moved over to the New Brand Ventures unit, Castle Brands has been reinvented as a boutique importer and distributor. This past week, Pernod Ricard announced that Castle Brands would serve as the U.S. importer for its Method and Madness experimental whiskies from its Irish Distillers unit. That's Whiskey Cast in Depth, brought to you by Oban. Every sip of Oban is like a postcard from Scotland. Whether it's the classic Oban 14-year-old, the 18-year-old, Oban Little Bay, or the Distillers edition, every drop comes from the coastal town of Oban and a distillery just 206 steps away from the sea. It's one of Scotland's smallest distilleries, with just 7 people who make whiskey the same way their predecessors have since 1794. Find out more at obanwhiskey.com. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. Let's start off with the 2021 Yellowstone Limited Edition Bourbon Steve Beam told us about a few minutes ago. It's bottled at 50.5% ABV. The nose has touches of charred oak, toasted caramel, cocoa, soft spices, and honey. The taste is thick, chewy, and spicy, but has a well-balanced sweetness that complements the black pepper and cinnamon spices, with notes of butterscotch, vanilla, and cocoa, along with hints of leather and pipe tobacco in the background. The finish is long, complex, and well-balanced. I'm scoring the 2021 Yellowstone Limited Edition Bourbon a 92. Rabbit Hole in Louisville is one of the distilleries Pernod Ricard has acquired over the last couple of years, and Cava Zamanian's latest Founders Collection release is Race King. It's a 5-grain bourbon that tests the boundaries of malting. There's chocolate malted wheat from Germany and chocolate malted barley from the UK in the mash bill, along with 70% corn, 13% rye, and 10% malted rye. It's bottled at 54.6% ABV. The nose has notes of cocoa powder, dark chocolate, honey, toasted oak, dried apples, and a touch of leather. The taste is very dry and astringent, with cocoa powder, black pepper, a hint of allspice, honey, and dried fruits. And in this case, adding some water boosts the spices while keeping everything else in balance. The finish is long with subtle spices and a nice touch of cocoa powder. I'm scoring Rabbit Hole's Race King Bourbon a 90. I'll have more tasting notes in just a minute, but first, this week's tasting notes are brought to you by Sagamore Spirit Rye Whiskey. They're reviving the tradition of Maryland-style rye at their Baltimore Farm and Waterfront Distillery. In-person tastings are available once again at the distillery in Baltimore, but you'll also find a variety of virtual tours, tastings, and other experiences at the Sagamore Spirit website. And they're offering WhiskeyCast listeners a free virtual guided tasting. When you buy bottles from your local retailer, a Sagamore Spirit teammate will guide you through each one. Visit SagamoreSpirit.com and use the code WhiskeyCast, all one word, to access. Please drink responsibly. I mentioned Brown-Forman's King of Kentucky Bourbon during the news. The 2021 edition is a 14-year-old single-barrel bourbon with 33 different barrels selected by Chris Morris. I received a sample the other day, and while the bottling strength will vary from 62.5% to 67.5% ABV, depending on the barrel, my sample came in at an even 65% ABV. The nose is dark and aromatic with hints of caramel, figs, cocoa beans, dry spices, hints of citrus, and a nice oakiness. The taste is very thick and chewy, with baking spices, dried fruits, caramel syrup, hints of citrus, and a touch of toasted coconut that comes out as the spices start to fade. Adding a few drops of water opens up the fruitier notes while making the mouth feel a bit less chewy. The finish is long and still quite spicy, along with touches of toasted coconut, citrus fruits, and chocolate. I'm scoring the 2021 King of Kentucky Bourbon a 95. Finally, I spent some time last week in Fallon, Nevada at Frey Ranch Farmers and Distillers, where they grow all of the grain for their whiskeys on site and even do their own malting. Tasted some of their single barrel releases that you'll find under their Distiller's Reserve label. Barrel 1001 came in at 64.98% ABV, to be exact. But even at that strength, the nose is subtle and aromatic with touches of black cherries, cake frosting, powdered sugar, marzipan, and hints of spearmint and dried grass. The taste is mouth-puckeringly dry with baking spices that last and last, balanced out by touches of honey, vanilla, and hints of garden herbs and cocoa powder that come out as the spices fade. Water adds more complexity to the palate, opening up touches of dried fruits along with the lighter flavor components, and the finish is extremely long and complex with dry spices and lingering hints of honey, vanilla, and black cherries. I'm scoring the Frey Ranch Distillers Reserve Bourbon Barrel 1001 a 95. And full disclosure, I was in Nevada as part of a group of whiskey writers visiting the distillery as their guest. But as with all of our content, full editorial control remains with WhiskeyCast. The What I'm Tasting This Week department is brought to you by Sagamore Spirit. I've added these whiskeys to our searchable list of tasting notes for more than 3,200 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at whiskycast.com.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Small batch. How would you describe it? It's like an Irishman's understanding of baseball. Extremely limited.
Proud sponsor of WhiskeyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
Let's open up the inbox now for your voice. The other day, it was announced that the will of the late Prince Philip will be sealed for the next 90 years to protect the privacy of Britain's royal family. Well, I joked on Twitter that I have asked that my whiskey collection be sealed for 90 years after my death. Unfortunately, I did not have to get the fire extinguisher out to put out the flames. Instead, we had a bunch of jokes. Our pal from just up the road, Sam Spears, tweeted, "Clearly, Mr. Gillespie's Twitter account has been hacked." Jeff Ball at Popis107, "I'm going after the open ones." From the pride of Halifax, Nova Scotia, Tyrone Cote, "How about the earlier of 90 years after your death or a Flyers Stanley Cup win?" Very funny, Tyrone. From Andrea Duke at Mujer del Whiskey, and I hope I'm saying that correctly, "Leave them to me. Don't worry." And from Dave Kuhn at Different Daves on Twitter, "I'd like my closest friends to each get a stash bottle each and then the rest get opened up for the wake. Unless I know I'm about to kick it, and then we'll all drink them together." Personally, I kind of like that idea, Dave. I have mentioned this before. My standing request to my family is that they either have one hell of a wake with all of my open bottles, or give me a traditional Viking funeral. Of course, environmental laws would probably keep that from happening. But it does bring up an interesting question. If you've been a whiskey lover for a while, there is probably a pretty good chance that you'll never be able to finish off all the whiskeys you have at home. So, what do you want your family to do with them after you're gone? Tell us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn, and I'll share some of the responses next time around. Of course, if there's anything else you'd like to share with whiskey lovers around the world, you can also do that on our social media timelines too, or just email us, comments@whiskycast.com. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people that make whiskey unique. It's brought to you by Writer's Tears. There are two types of distillation processes used in distilleries. And no, I'm not talking about column stills or pot stills. It's actually a decision the distiller makes much earlier in the process, whether to ferment and distill on the grain or off the grain. Cooking grain with hot water releases the starch content and converts it into sugars that will eventually be turned into alcohol by the yeast during fermentation. But there's a lot of solid material left that doesn't dissolve right away. Distillers who want to capture some of the flavor compounds left in those solids may choose to distill on the grain by sending the entire mash onto the fermenters and eventually their stills, before finally filtering out the remaining solids or draff. But if you've ever seen a lauter tun at a distillery, they're distilling off the grain. As the mash is cooked, the sugary water gets drained out through holes in the bottom of the tun. Those holes keep the remaining solid material left from the grain in the tun, while rotating blades keep the grain moving so it doesn't clog up the drains. Either way, what's left behind usually winds up as feed for livestock. If there's something or someone you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just use the contact form at whiskeycast.com to get in touch with us. Behind the Label is brought to you by Writer's Tears.
Writer's Tears Copperpot. The tears of Ireland's great writers bursting with flavour, humour and angst. Bottled for you to taste. No writers were harmed in the making of this premium Irish whiskey. Writer's Tears Copperpot.
That's all for this edition of Whiskey Cast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskeycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and, of course, a complete archive of all of our past episodes going all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskeyCast. The email address, comments@whiskeycast.com.
Just like the end of this Whiskey Cast episode, Dewar's Scotch Whiskey always makes for a smooth finish. Like our newly released Dewar's Japanese Smooth, aged for 8 years in Scotland, blended then aged again before being finished for up to 6 months in Mizunara oak casks made from 200-year-old Japanese water oak trees. These unique casks layer distinct dry and spicy flavors to the whiskey, with aromas reminiscent of sandalwood and incense. Keep an eye out for a bottle of Dewar's Japanese Smooth at a store near you.
And now, a message from Robin Redbreast.
Ever wondered where Redbreast got its name? Well, let's go back to 1912 and be glad our bird-watching founder didn't spot the bar-tailed godwit that day.
Proud sponsor of WhiskeyCast. Redbreast. Pass it on.
WhiskeyCast is a production of Cast Strength Media, copyright 2021, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening, and please stay safe.